end portion where I see not too long now the chains come off. This is when the chains now begin to fall off.
I must remind you before ending this segment, again praise God Almighty, as the Dream Vision said, in March 2020 the century of bondage ended. This is the start of our freedom.
It does not mean it will be easy, it simply means, it's the start.
The chains are about to come undone. All these strikes, the chaos is all part of this, and I can tell you, when it gets real bad, people are going to come out and attack me and say, where is the century of bondage ending or the chains coming undone? But this is all part of the chains coming undone, and these things taking place in the country and the world are the tail ends of that century of bondage.
All these globalist things installed here and around the world a century ago are part of the chains coming undone and the century of bondage which ended in March 2020.
The century of bondage ended in March 2020. Everything happening now is like the key going into the lock, into the handcuffs of the nation. Each event, each incident is the key moving slowly to unlock it before they drop off. When they hit the ground, the nation will run into their freedom. So I will leave it here and return to continue our world events updates tomorrow, where we discuss the COSATU nationwide strike. I will discuss what I see and where I see things going, and I believe this all falls in line with Ramaphosa on the world stage and 2 other dream visions on the channel which tell us where we are and what will take place.
They are different angles, sides of the same event seen from different angles.
I continue now writing on where I have left off the previous day. Today is the early hours of the 26th of August 2022.
My initial assessment of the nationwide strike was correct. It was small and not that large. The good news is it was a small strike. The bad news is it was a small strike.
This is just the start of the strikes. I have seen a few different things over the past days since writing this.
The very next day after the strike we had residents in Soweto burning and doing the usual thing. Nothing new there, but we must never forget one thing.
The government is working with all these unions and the opposition parties such as the F. They are one and the same thing. The way I see them is one would see a multinational corporation.
Each one of these organizations, unions, political parties in the country is part of the larger whole.
Their objective for the country, their objective for the white minority is the same objective one would find in any multinational company. You go to a McDonald's in another country and it's a carbon copy of the McDonald's in your home country. The objective is the same, the mode of operation is the same, the objective of these multinational corporations is the same, and so it is no different than the objectives of a communist government. The trade unions were striking for better conditions, yet all the conditions we experience in the country are directly related to the policies they pushed in the country for the last 30 years. So in other words, they have directed this ship to its final destination, and the final destination is not simply sinking the Titanic but to claim the insurance from sinking the ship. Sinking South Africa is only the start. The ANC have always maintained a policy of liberating South Africa. Liberation in their minds, whether you want to live in a fantasy land, is one thing, but the reality is stated in their policy documents already back in the early 90s and way back before that. They have said openly they do not want whites in South Africa. If you keep that objective in mind and then work backwards, then every single step, every action, every word, every speech, every policy,
every farm murder, every alliance they make is moving them in this direction.
Destroying infrastructure is destroying any and every memory of a white South Africa, and to think they were and are not even from South Africa. The Bantu nations are not from South Africa. Always keep this in mind, and it is a historical proof. Even Malema said this about 2 years back. So what I foresee happening now is the government putting the screws on the masses. This way they are riled up. Then along comes the federations and trade organizations to sweep up that anger to get them to riot, but this is still not good enough for their final objective,
which is to create a scenario of pushing the whites out. Hence why they need a captain, which of course would be the F.
If you push the masses to the extremes, all orchestrated, no jobs, no future, no power, no lights, it's easy to sweep them up into a nationwide strike.
Now we can connect the dots of what the seer mentioned when he said there would be nothing moving in the Union. No trains, no cars.
Without electricity you have no petrol, you have no trains.
Besides, they have already stolen, broken, destroyed the rail lines, so nothing will function there.
So we can see from this vision of his, that nothing will function, and it has to do with Eskom, and it will collapse, but it will be an orchestrated collapse. It's no coincidence the court kicked out Kill the Boer song saying it's not hate speech. Of course nothing is hate speech when it's against whites. This is not only in South Africa but the world.
It's the fulfillment of the seer's words about the future when white racism would be on the increase and whites would feel all kinds of pressure and racism geared towards them.
Well, we see it not only in South Africa but the world. We must remember here in South Africa there is a huge hidden hand. This part of the world is going to draw in all the nations, as I mentioned, going back to the
earlier videos of 2019 where I said all these nations will meet to fight it out in South Africa.
I mentioned I see the Portuguese and Spanish coming down to Southern Africa. At that time I could not understand nor believe it.
The present crisis unfolding in Europe is going to push European nations once more to go back to doing what they did for centuries, and that is to conquer.
People do not like these terms, but it's either be conquered or conquer. In a Walt Disney film, it would be nice if this was not the case, but this is the real world.
I said in the previous vision I had about China and India in Africa.
India in Mozambique and China in northern Angola, that they will try prevent the Europeans from accessing resources and to deal Europe a death blow.
This will be exerted through their influence in Africa and South Africa.
The seer mentioned that there will be an influence of India here in South Africa. Just a week back there was that report by YN News about Irania. So we see that came out not long after the Americans arrived in South Africa to discuss Russia and
to slither on their bellies to their partners in crime who they put in charge to destroy the country.
Yes, when you see a pothole in the road, when you hear a farmer being murdered, when you cannot find a job, when the power is out, you can thank the West for leading the charge against South Africa, starting off with their talk about South Africa being a threat to them and the world. Of course, when we talk about countries we never talk about individuals on the ground or citizens, but the policies of government. We see as South Africa, white South Africa was seen as an enemy. Now the new threat to America is the white Europeans in America. Nothing changed there, the same agenda. It was all geared for the destruction of the European Christian nations. So getting back to India.
India's state-run channel YN News, which is aired on YouTube, was pushing the Irania racism nonsense again, and no one ever calls India out about their centuries-old caste system called Jati. If you are born into that caste system, too bad, you will never rise to the top.
If whites are so racist, why are all their deities and gods all white? In Asia you do not find brown or black gods. Throughout Asia you always find gods with blue eyes and fair skin.
See, these nations are playing the guilt game while at the same time doing exactly what they accuse Europe of doing.
China is colonizing Africa, India is as well. The influence they will exert on this portion of the world is going to impact us.
The whites in South Africa and the world are going to be caught up in this war between the East and the West, with Russia right in the middle.
I mentioned when I wrote this the other day that I see a clash coming in France.
Yesterday on the 24th of August, Macron said that life in Europe and France may never be the same, and this is the time of great upheaval.
Food prices continue to rise, and it is the fulfillment of the dream visions. All this began before the lockdowns, the invasion of Ukraine. I mentioned in 2020 the major economic collapse would come about, but that the virus was pushed out there to prevent the collapse that was to come. So France is now mentioning life is going to get difficult for the French and the Europeans. Not only is it going to get difficult, but there will be more violence. France has one of the largest Islamic populations in Europe. With tensions brewing with the Turks, this could flare up and cause issues in France and Europe, and as I typed this, one thing the seer said popped into my mind which connects the dots here. Iran could also influence this, they could set off a trigger to have it pointed at Turkey.
Iran and Turkey throughout the centuries have always clashed.
The Islamic nations do not trust each other either. The seer mentioned the following: shops empty, election issues in France, and race riots.
They are all connected. The shops emptying due to the lockdowns, the war in Ukraine with Russia, the race riots.
The largest population in France which gets the most benefits are the new migrants and the migrant families that live there. Your average French woman has on average 1 to 2 children, while the new arrivals have between 4 to 5 children. This has been going on now for decades. If life becomes difficult, there will be more crime, more tension due to fighting over scarce resources. Combine the impact of the war picking up in Europe, and it's a powder keg about to go off in Europe. At the same time, here in South Africa, the influence of India and China. I am convinced the snake in Rhodesia the seer spoke about is China, due to the vision I had about America clashing with China around Zimbabwe.
The Chinese just finished building a huge parliament in Zimbabwe for the Zimbabweans, or should we say the new Chinese headquarters of Southern Africa. If this seems like I am jumping from one topic to another, it's because I am.
None of this is scripted. I do not even review what has been written, so I aim to tie all this in so we can see events unfolding and how they will impact us. If you watch how America fights wars, they never go in alone and they never do the heavy lifting themselves. We see that unfolding in Asia at the moment with China. China has now been checkmated by Japan, America, South Korea and the Philippines. The result of all these checkmates is that the battle will not take place on these countries' soils, or in their backyards, but will begin to pick up more at a distance. I see Africa as one of those battlegrounds. As the Europeans are squeezed, they are going to go back to doing what they were doing. This will push them out of their social comfort zones and once again bring them out of Europe. At the same time, China, India and the alliance want Africa for themselves. China and India are far more racist than any European ever was on a bad day. Africa thinks they had it bad under European rule, they have never lived under Asian rule. They should ask the Africans who live in China or India what life is like. The closest Africa ever got to experiencing these other races was with the Arabs, who feel nothing for them. One only has to go to the history books and read about the Ottoman slave trade in Africa, which resulted in more than 20 million African slaves who never returned.
This is not even counting or taking into account the slave trade on the east coast of Africa. So the battleground will be Africa.
One of the dream visions I had was something to do with CAR, Central African Republic. One of them I said something along the lines of Russia in Africa and France clash. Now we can see how that unfolds.
With France supplying Ukraine's army in their fight against Russia, we will see a clash in Africa.
Already Mali kicked out the French, so Africa is going to be on the map and radar of many of these nations. If you go back to the early videos on the first channel, you will see I said when there is a crisis in the Mediterranean around this region that they will come down to southern Africa for this shipping lane. They cannot lose it. If the West lose this shipping lane and route around the Cape, then it's all just about lost for the West. The result of all of this is conflict in Africa. Do you think it is a coincidence that Botswana and Namibia, a week after Blinken's arrival in South Africa, all of a sudden cut trade with South Africa? This is the pressure put on them to put pressure on South Africa. Many have asked me about events in the country. I have held off on 3 dream visions about South Africa. I leave them because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and the less our enemy sees what's about to transpire, the better it is for us. There could also be a trigger point where the communists try trigger race issues in this country to make it flare up in both America and Europe.
The seer mentioned the communists in Britain will cause race riots.